Have you ever thought to yourself, I really want a sandwich, but I want to eat it tomorrow at the earliest, and I want to spend several hours making it? Okay, I know the answer to that is no, but I'm going to show you how to do it anyways. You absolutely don't need to go this hard. It's okay if you don't make your own bread. You can buy pate or cut it completely if awful's not your jam. But if you have the time and patience, I can promise you this will be one of the best sandwiches you've ever eaten. So let's do this. We're going to start with the chashu pork belly. First thing you want to do is tenderize the meat. This will make maneuvering the belly into the signature roll a lot easier later on. Once the meat is feeling supple, which was just as uncomfortable to say as it probably was to hear, you can roll it starting from the longer end. Don't worry about getting this super tight, we just need it to be ready to tie. Now if you're like me and you ended up getting way more pork belly than was strictly necessary, you may need to cut your roll in half. Next you'll tie your pork belly to cook. This will both make the meat easier to maneuver and leave you with a juicier end product, plus it will look more impressive and therefore so will you. Grab some butcher twine and tightly tie one end together. There are a lot of fancy ways to finish this, but I found that winding a tight spiral and pulling it back through the loops to the start worked just fine. Once your pork has been properly trussed, add some vegetable oil to your favorite skillet and set to medium-high heat. The goal is to sear all sides, removing fat and leaving the finished chashu less greasy, more flavorful. When you've gotten a moderately uniform golden brown crust, set the pork aside. Optionally, at this point, you can boil the pork in unseasoned water for an hour. This will further remove excess fat, tame some of the gaminess, and stop the salty cooking broth from toughening up the meat. I did not do this, however, and ultimately had no issues with flavor or texture. Now it's time to put together the broth your belly will be cooking in. The ingredients for the broth are simple. You'll need a few green onions, 1 cup of drinkable sake, 1 cup of your favorite soy sauce, a knob of ginger, 2/3 cup of sugar, and 2 cups of water. Combine these ingredients in a Dutch oven. I'm using an enameled cast iron here, which will allow for the most even heating, along with an easier cleanup afterwards, but if you don't have access to one of these, any deep-walled pot will work. I borrowed this one from a friend, and found the promise of delicious pork belly was a suitably enticing trade. Once you have your liquid prepped, transfer the seared pork to the Dutch oven and bring to a boil, skimming off any scum that has risen to the surface before bringing back down to a simmer. At this point, you will place an Otoshibuta, or drop lid, over the simmering ingredients. This special lid will help circulate the sauce as well as preventing evaporation. You can find these on Amazon or at your local Japanese grocer if you're lucky enough to have one available, but I'll include a link in the description for making one out of tinfoil like I've done here. Continue simmering the pork for the next 2 hours, rotating every half hour before removing the meat and allowing both it and the reduced cooking sauce to cool. The sauce is amazing, and you should absolutely use it to make ramen eggs. Those aren't needed for this recipe, but they are delicious, and this is good advice. Once cooled, set aside half a cup of cooking liquid per portion of chashu you have and pull out your vacuum sealer. Place the pork in a vacuum bag with a half cup of reserved liquid. A neat trick I found while researching this recipe is to place a folded paper towel at the opening of the bag before sealing to catch the liquid before your vacuum sealer becomes a swimming pool of sticky sauce. It's possible that this was not the first take. If you don't own a vacuum sealer, a gallon bag will still work. Either way, you'll want to then throw the meat in the fridge for at least 4 hours, but preferably overnight. Meat accomplished, it's time to make our bread. On a lark, I decided to replace the liquid in the bread with a simple dashi, which is a light Japanese broth. This is made by combining a handful of dried shiitake mushrooms, a handful of bonito flakes, and a handful of seaweed or a couple of sheets of kombu in water, bringing to a boil, then removing from the heat and allowing to steep for 10 to 15 minutes. Dashi purists might rightfully point out that shiitake is not classically added to the broth, however, I had some on hand and I like the flavor it adds, so please don't at me. Strain the dashi and allow to cool completely before adding 2 grams of sugar and 7 grams of active dry yeast. Give these a good stir to combine before setting aside in a warm place to give the yeast time to bloom. It should look frothy and smell like a brewery when it's ready. Next, to the bowl of a stand mixer add the following: 500 grams of bread or all-purpose flour, 5 grams of sea salt, 30 grams of avocado or light vegetable oil, 1 large whole egg, and then the activated dry yeast mixture that you made earlier. Place the bowl back on a stand mixer and knead the dough with a bread hook for about 10 minutes until the dough has a nice stretch and elasticity to it. You'll want to mix on a medium speed, which is a 3 or 4 if you're using a KitchenAid. If you don't own a stand mixer, you can absolutely do this the old-fashioned way by mixing manually in a large bowl until a shaggy dough comes together, then kneading by hand until either you achieve the same elasticity or your arms give out completely. Transfer your dough to a well-oiled bowl, making sure to oil all sides and cover. Allow the dough to rest in a warm location until roughly doubled in size, after which it's time to shape your banh mi. On your preferred work surface, I use a silicone baking mat, deposit your freshly risen dough and divide into 6 equal pieces. Feel free to be rough with your dough at this point, as you want to remove any air bubbles that have formed during the first rise. Form your dough into rough triangles, then starting from the pointy end of the triangle, roll and pinch the sides in until you've formed a small, skinny baguette. Complete this same process with the other 5 segments before transferring to a perforated baguette pan. This is a great pan to own if you love making bread, but a baking sheet will be fine if you don't have access to all of the weird kitchen gadgets that I do. I would like to note at this time that I am aware of how the baguettes look on the pan. It is in fact the first thing anyone who has watched the rough edits of this episode has pointed out to me, and so I release you of any responsibility you may have felt to do so in the comments. Preheat your oven to 425 degrees and cover your baguettes with a damp towel. Allow them to rise in a warm place until nearly doubled in size. I used the top of my oven while it was preheating, and they went a little gangbusters. Spray your baguettes down with water before using a baking lame or sharp knife to create a controlled slash across the tops of the dough. Spray the baguettes down once more before placing them into the oven. An important note is to add a roasting pan full of boiling water to your oven while it preheats, and not forgetfully add it immediately before the bread goes in. You'll want to spray the bread and oven down when you first add the dough, then 3 more times in 2-minute intervals. Allow to bake for 6 more minutes before pulling the roasting pan from the oven. Allow to bake for a final 10 minutes or until golden brown, then pull and allow to cool completely. Total baking time is around 22 minutes. Now it's time to work on the shiitake pate. Start by cleaning 1 pound of chicken livers of any connective tissue or gristle. Let me reiterate, as I feel I might have just lost half of you, the pate is not strictly necessary, but I do think it adds a nice balance to the sandwich. You'll then mince 1 large shallot, thinly slice half a pound of fresh shiitake mushrooms, crush and then mince 6 cloves of fresh garlic, and mince 1 to 2 sprigs of fresh thyme. Get a skillet or sauté pan nice and hot before adding everything but the mushrooms to the pan. The goal here is to heat until fragrant, however, if you misjudge how hot your pan is and brown your garlic, I can personally assure you the end result will still taste good. Cook the liver until it is thoroughly gray and unappetizing before setting the pan's contents aside. Add your sliced shiitake, seasoning lightly as you should be doing always and at all steps, and cook the mushrooms down until soft, but not mushy, before setting these aside as well. Into the bowl of a food processor, add your cooked chicken liver while one of your cats sneaks through the background of your footage, all of the cooked mushrooms, 3 teaspoons of MSG, yes, MSG, it is delicious, you should use it, and I do so shamelessly, and then 3 ounces of a junmai sake. Blend these ingredients on high speed, then slowly begin adding 6 ounces or a stick and a half of unsalted butter. Season to taste with salt and pepper and continue blending until a smooth consistency is reached, then transfer to chill in the fridge. Next up, we'll be putting together a quick pickled ginger and daikon to top our sandwich. Start by peeling a knob of ginger, then give it a quick julienne cut. Julienne is just a fancy way of saying nice, evenly sized little sticks, and while this has some mild effect on the texture and is very useful for rapid cooking, in this instance, it's mostly just for aesthetic appeal. Peel a comfortable chunk of daikon radish and give it the same treatment. Now that you have your beautiful veggie sticks, grab a convenient container and add 3/4 cup of plum vinegar, 3/4 cup of rice vinegar, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and a healthy glug of hot sesame oil, along with 3/4 cup of water. Shake to combine before adding the veg, then throw in the fridge until needed. It's finally time to assemble our sandwich. Grab a couple of fresh jalapenos and a cucumber. Cut these on a bias so that your friends and family understand that you are a real chef to be taken seriously. Retrieve your chashu from the fridge and decant it from the vacuum bag. Slice the pork into whatever thickness you're comfortable consuming on a sandwich, then place on a metal baking sheet. There are many different ways to reheat chashu, but if you have access to a butane cooking torch, it is a great way to both get a lovely char on the meat and an opportunity to directly play with fire in the kitchen. My chashu banh mi is assembled as follows. Retrieve one of your baguettes and slice it open, noting the beautiful crust and soft, delicate bread within. On the bottom half of the bread, lay a comfortable layer of Kewpie mayo. Follow this by shingling and then seasoning your cucumber before doing the same with the star of the sandwich, your Chashu pork belly. After taking a moment to stare in wonder at the fatty goodness, hide your efforts under a layer of fresh arugula. This won't make the sandwich healthy, but it will add a nice fresh bite. Top your greens with the quick pickles you made earlier, and finish the tower with a spicy line of fresh jalapenos. To complete this masterpiece of modern culinary fusion, spread your shiitake pate on the top half of the bread before carefully tucking and closing the sandwich. Now let's get ourselves a cross-section before we cut to past Josh for the taste test. Well, time to find out if hours and hours and days of work was worth the effort. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, anybody that's still watching, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was my first video. It was a ton of work, a lot of fun to shoot. I hope to shoot a whole bunch going forward. If you really enjoyed it, if you learned anything, please go ahead and hit that like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. I'm told that it helps me. I hope to be showing you guys a lot of really cool stuff in the future. So take care, everyone.